It was a quiet night on Highway 17. The wind was soft, and the road was empty. A black car moved slowly, its headlights shining straight ahead. Inside the car sat a calm black man, dressed in a neat jacket, both hands on the steering wheel. His name was David Walker. He was not speeding. He wasn't doing anything wrong. He was just going home. Suddenly, flashing red and blue lights appeared behind him. A loud siren broke the silence. David sighed deeply. He slowly pulled over to the side of the road and parked. His eyes stayed forward. His hands stayed on the wheel. A police car stopped behind him. The officer stepped out, young, white, angry. His name was Officer Greg Miller. He walked fast toward the car, his hand already on his gun. "License and registration," he said sharply. David kept his voice calm. "Of course, officer. I'll reach for them now." Officer Miller narrowed his eyes. "Why are you out here this late?" "I was visiting an old friend," David replied. "Step out of the vehicle," the officer said, already suspicious. David slowly opened the door and stepped out. He stood tall, shoulders straight. His face was calm, his voice was respectful. But there was something in his eyes, something strong, something that made the officer feel uneasy. "You look nervous," Miller said. "You hiding something?" "No, sir," David said. "I've done nothing wrong." But the officer didn't care. He called for backup. 2 more patrol cars arrived. 3 more officers surrounded David. One of them checked his car. The other searched his pockets. David didn't argue. He didn't yell. He stood still, quiet, patient. Then Officer Miller opened the glove box. There was a leather folder inside. He opened it and saw a shiny ID card. It read, U.S. Department of Defense. Colonel David Walker Miller frowned. "What is this?" David looked him in the eye. "That's my military ID." Miller laughed. "You, a colonel?" The other officers looked confused. One of them took the ID, scanned it with his phone. His face changed. "Sir," he whispered to Miller, "this is real." Officer Miller stared at David. "You're telling me you're a colonel in the U.S. Army?" "Yes," David said simply. The silence was loud. The other officers stepped back a little. They didn't know what to say. The mood changed. Miller cleared his throat. "Why didn't you say anything earlier?" David smiled softly. "You didn't ask." There was no anger in his voice, just quiet strength. The officer's hands were shaking now. He took a step back. "I'm going to need to verify this," he muttered. "You can call the number on the back of the card," David replied. Officer Miller stepped away, pulling out his phone. He called the number. A woman's voice answered. "This is Major Lyle, U.S. Army Command Center. Who is this?" "This is Officer Greg Miller from Crestfield Police. I just stopped a man claiming to be Colonel David Walker." There was silence, on the line for a moment. Then the voice said, firm and clear, "Put Colonel Walker back on the phone, now!" Miller froze. He turned and looked at David. He walked slowly over, holding out the phone. "It's for you, sir," he said quietly. David took the phone. "Walker speaking." "Colonel," said the voice, now respectful. "We'll handle this. Stay calm. Someone will contact the station immediately." David nodded. "Understood." He gave the phone back. Officer Miller looked embarrassed, unsure what to do. The other officers avoided eye contact. "Colonel," Miller said, voice soft now. I'm sorry. I didn't know." David didn't answer. He got back into his car, closed the door, and drove off slowly. No fast moves, no hard words, just silence. Inside his car, he looked at the empty road ahead. His face showed no anger, just something deeper, something heavier. He had served his country for 25 years. He had led missions in dangerous lands. He had saved lives. But here, on a quiet road in his own country, he was still pulled over. for looking suspicious. The flashing lights were now far behind him, but the feeling remained, and Officer Miller stood by his patrol car, watching the taillights disappear into the night. In his chest, a strange feeling began to grow: guilt, shame, and a question. Who really was the man he had just tried to treat like a criminal? He would soon find out. David Walker sat in his small apartment, the city lights glowing faintly outside the window. The night was quiet, but inside his mind, memories of the past years raced like a storm. It was not always like this, being stopped for no reason, doubted by others. Once, David had a different life, a life full of hope, hard work, and dreams. 20. Years ago, he was a young man fresh out of college. He had joined the U.S. Army because he wanted to serve his country. His family was proud, but his journey was not easy. From the first day at the training camp, David faced more than just tough exercises. Some soldiers whispered, some officers looked down on him. They saw a black man and judged before they knew. Him. "Why did you get in the Army?" a drill sergeant asked one day, his voice sharp and cold. David kept his head high. "Because I want to protect the people of this country." The sergeant snorted but said no more. Every day was a battle. Not just with the hard drills and long marches, but with the silent walls of prejudice. Some fellow soldiers doubted his skills. Others avoided working with him, but David did not give up. He worked harder. He ran faster. He studied longer. When others rested, he practiced shooting or studied military history. Slowly, the other soldiers began to see something different. Not just a black man, but a soldier with courage and skill. In his second year, David was sent to Afghanistan. The war was dangerous. His unit was small and often outnumbered. One night, their base was attacked by enemy fighters. David's quick thinking saved many lives. He organized his squad, found cover, and led a counterattack that pushed the enemy back. His commanders noticed. His reputation grew. He was promoted to sergeant, then lieutenant. But the battles were not only outside. Back at camp, some officers still doubted him because of his skin color. Once after a meeting, a senior officer said quietly, "You'll never be a real leader. Not with that face." David heard it but did not respond. Instead, he worked harder. Years passed. He went to many missions. He learned how to lead, how to stay calm under fire, how to earn respect not with words but with actions. His promotions came slowly but steadily. Captain, major, then colonel. He earned medals for bravery and leadership. He saved lives again and again. But every step was hard. Every victory came after a fight against both enemies and unfair judgment. At last, after 25 years, David returned home. He dreamed of a peaceful life, far from war. But the country he served did not always welcome him as a hero. That night, when the police siren flashed behind his car, David felt the weight of all those years again. He remembered the faces of soldiers he had lost. He thought about the battles he fought, not just with guns, but with hate and doubt. And he knew his fight was not over, because some people still saw only the color of his skin, not the courage in his heart. Back in the present, David looked down at his hands. They were steady, strong, hands that had carried weapons, healed wounds, and signed orders. But now those same hands gripped the steering wheel, driving through a world that sometimes forgot his true story. Officer Greg Miller sat alone in the police station break room. His coffee was cold. His hands were still shaking. He stared at the ID card on the table. Colonel David Walker, United States Army. The words felt heavy. He couldn't sleep. Ever since he let David go, his thoughts wouldn't stop. He had pulled over a man who had done nothing wrong, and that man turned out to be a decorated U.S. colonel. Why didn't he see it before? Why didn't he stop and think? Greg had always believed he was a good cop. He followed the rules. He cared about justice. But tonight, he had judged a man just by the way he looked. He didn't ask questions. He didn't show respect. He saw a black man in an old car and assumed the worst. And now, that mistake was burning in his chest. In the other room, Officer James, his partner, walked in. "You still here?" James asked. Greg didn't look up. "Yeah." James sat beside him. "You okay?" Greg shook his head. "No, I messed up. Big time." James leaned back. "You didn't know who he was." "That's the problem," Greg said quietly. "I didn't even try to know. I treated him like a criminal, but he's a war hero." James sighed. "You're not the first cop to make a mistake." Greg looked at him, his voice shaking. "My dad was a soldier. He always said, 'Never judge a man before you know his story.' I forgot that tonight." Greg stood up and walked to the evidence room. He asked the clerk to bring the dashcam footage. He needed to see it again. The video started. The flashing lights, the calm voice of David Walker, the quiet strength in his eyes. Greg watched himself on. The screen, loud, demanding, suspicious. He didn't like what he saw. David had shown respect from the beginning. He never raised his voice. He didn't argue. He didn't fight back. And still, Greg had treated him like a threat. Later that night, Greg searched online for Colonel David Walker. The results were overwhelming. News stories, military photos, articles about missions in Iraq and Afghanistan, medals for bravery, honors from presidents, speeches about unity and respect. There was even a photo of him hugging a crying soldier in a war zone, another of him speaking at a school for children of fallen soldiers. Greg scrolled in silence. Each image hit him like a punch to the chest. He felt ashamed, angry at himself. How could he not recognize a hero? The next morning, the police chief called him into the office. "Sit down, Greg," the chief said. Greg sat quietly. "We got a call," the chief said. "From the Pentagon." Greg's heart sank. David Walker sat at his kitchen table, a cup of tea in his hands. The morning sun peeked through the window, lighting the medals on the wall. Photos of his army days hung around the room, some with soldiers he led, others with children he helped after war. But his face was not proud today. It was quiet, tired. He kept hearing the voice of the police officer who had stopped him. That sharp tone, the disbelief, the fear. It wasn't the first time something like that had happened, but this time, something felt different. At that same moment. Inside the Pentagon, Major Lyle sat at her desk. She had received the report about the incident. She had also seen the dash cam video. She watched closely as David was pulled over, his calm voice, his respectful answers. And the way the officer ignored it all, she was angry. Not just because David was a colonel, but because he was a man of honor who didn't deserve that treatment. Major Lyle picked up the phone. She dialed a private number. The phone rang in David's home. He answered. "Walker speaking." "Colonel," said Major Lyle's firm but kind voice. "This is Lyle from the Pentagon. I saw what happened. I just want to say, we're deeply sorry." David was silent for a moment. Then he said softly, "It wasn't the first time." "I know," she replied, "but this time it won't be ignored." David raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "The chief of police has been contacted. The dashcam footage will be reviewed publicly, and the officer will be invited to the Pentagon." David looked surprised. "The Pentagon?" "Yes. We believe he needs to see the kind of man you are. Not through a screen, but face to face." David didn't speak for a moment. "Do you think that will change anything?" "It could," she replied. "Sometimes one meeting can change a man's heart." 2 days later, Officer Greg Miller stood at the front gate of the Pentagon, nervous and sweating. He had received a call from the Army's command center asking him to come for a special briefing. He had never been so far from home, never entered a place this secure. Inside, he was met by 2 military guards. They checked his ID, then led him through long halls, past busy officers and serious faces. Finally, they reached a private meeting room. Inside sat Colonel David Walker, in uniform, medals on his chest. Calm, strong, silent. Greg froze. For a moment, he couldn't speak. David stood slowly and walked toward him. "Officer Miller," he said calmly. Greg swallowed hard. "Colonel, I'm sorry. I truly am." David nodded. "Come, sit." They sat across from each other. There was silence for a few moments. Then Greg spoke. "I didn't see you. I saw a man, but not the full man." David replied, "You saw what you expected, a threat." Greg looked down. "I thought I was a good cop, but that night, I wasn't fair. I judged you. I didn't ask. I just assumed." David looked him in the eyes. "That's the problem, officer. You are not the only one." Greg looked around at the walls filled with photos of soldiers, leaders, and flags. "You've done more for this country than I ever will. And I treated you like a criminal." "I've been serving for 25 years, David said. "But respect doesn't come with the uniform. It should come with humanity." Greg nodded slowly. His eyes began to water. "I want to change," he said. "Not just say sorry, but understand better, be better." David watched him for a long time. Then he said, "Then start by listening. Listen to stories like mine. Learn from people you don't understand yet. That's the first step." Greg stood up, and so did David. He held out his hand. Greg shook it, firmly, respectfully, and in that handshake, something changed. Not just between 2 men, but maybe, just maybe, the beginning of a bigger change. 2 days after Officer Greg Miller's visit to the Pentagon, a video appeared online. It was a short clip. It showed the moment Greg pulled over Colonel David Walker. It showed the uncomfortable questions, the doubt, and the quiet respect in David's calm replies. Then, it cut to another video, taken later, showing the 2 men shaking hands inside the Pentagon, standing side by side, no anger, just honesty. The video went viral within hours. People from every corner of the country began to watch it. Some were shocked, some were angry, and many were deeply moved. In a small-town cafe, an old veteran named Mike watched the clip on his phone. He wiped his eyes with a napkin. "I've fought beside men like him," he said to the waitress. "Doesn't matter what color they are. Brave is brave." Across the country, a high school teacher played the video in her classroom. "Watch closely," she told her students. "This is what it means to listen, to learn, to grow." News channels picked up the story. Colonel pulled over by Cop 4. No reason. Then this happened, one headline read. "From tension to change, a powerful moment between 2 Americans," said another. TV reporters spoke of David's long service record, his bravery, and how he kept his cool even when disrespected. They also spoke of Greg, how he faced his mistake, didn't hide, and took steps to make it right. For many, it wasn't just a police story anymore. It was a story about change, about hope, about the power of seeing someone as a human being, not just a uniform, not just a skin color. At home, David sat quietly on his couch, watching the news. His phone buzzed every few minutes, messages from friends, fellow soldiers, strangers from across the country. "Thank you for your service. You handled that with such grace. You've opened my eyes." One message stood out. It was from a young man named Malik, age 17. "Sir, I'm black and thinking about joining the Army. I was scared no one would respect me. But after seeing you, I believe I can." David stared at the message for a long time, his eyes filled with quiet tears. Meanwhile, Greg was also watching. He had been afraid to read the comments at first, but when he finally did, he was surprised. Some were harsh, yes, but many were thankful. Takes courage to admit your mistake. You listened. That's where change starts. Please train other officers like you're trying to change. Greg felt something shift inside him. This wasn't about clearing his name anymore. This was about using his mistake to make something better. Later that week, Greg and David were invited to speak at a public event, a community gathering focused on trust between police and citizens. Hundreds came. Some were police officers. Others were veterans. Most were regular people, mothers, fathers, students, neighbors. David stood first. He spoke with calm strength. I've fought for this country. I've lost friends in war. But the hardest fight is the one we face right here at home. The fight for respect. The fight to be seen. The room was silent. Then Greg stepped forward. I thought I was a good cop, he began. But good intentions aren't enough when we act without thinking. I let fear and habit guide me that night, and I was wrong. He paused. But I learned, and I'm still learning. He turned to David. I thank this man, not just for serving the country, but for giving me the chance to see him, really see him. The audience clapped. Some stood. Many cried. In that moment, people didn't see a police officer and a black man. They saw two human beings changing the story together. By the end of the night, the crowd formed a line to shake their hands. One little boy looked up at David and asked, "Are you a real hero?" David smiled. I try to be, son. Colonel David Walker stood outside a small community center on a cool Saturday morning. He looked at the banner above the door. Unity through understanding, police and people together. It had been 3 weeks since the video went viral. 3 weeks since the world learned his name, not just as a soldier, but as a man who stayed calm when others would have exploded. Now people wanted more than just a handshake. They wanted change, and David was ready to lead a new kind of mission. Inside the building, rows of chairs were filled with police officers, students, teachers, and families. There were black, white, Latino, Asian faces, all watching, all waiting. David stepped up to the microphone. I spent 25 years in the military, he began. I was trained to lead, to protect, to fight when needed. But this new mission, it's different. He paused. Because now, I'm fighting for understanding. The room was silent, listening to every word. I was judged that night, he continued. Not for what I did, but for what I looked like. And that happens to so many people every day. But here's the truth. We can change that. Greg Miller sat in the front row, wearing a plain shirt, not his uniform. He had asked to attend, not as a cop, but as a student. He wanted to learn. After David's speech, Greg was invited to speak too. I thought I was protecting people, he said. But I wasn't protecting everyone. I was making some feel afraid. I didn't even see it until I met Colonel Walker. He looked around the room. I'm not here to look like a hero. I made a mistake, but now I'm using that mistake to help train other officers, people clapped. Not for what he had done before, but for what he was trying to do now. Later, David and Greg sat together at a table with a group of young people. One teenage girl asked, "Do you think things can really change?" David nodded slowly. Change doesn't happen overnight, but it starts with moments like this. It starts with listening. It starts when one person says, "I was wrong and I want to do better." Another boy raised his hand. "What if people don't want to listen?" Greg replied. "Then we keep showing up, we keep speaking. Even if one person changes, that's one more step forward." The news spread quickly again. Colonel and cop launch peace program together. New hope in the heart of the community. From conflict to partnership, they were invited to speak in more cities. They talked in churches, at schools, at police academies. David stepped from the first car, dressed in his formal uniform. The medals on his chest caught the light, yet his face stayed humble. Beside him climbed out Greg, wearing a simple suit with a pin that read, "Serve and Protect All." Children, standing behind a rope line, cheered. One little girl shouted, "That's the colonel from the video!" Her mother whispered, "And the officer who said sorry." David and Greg exchanged a quick nod, battle buddies on a new kind of field. Inside the hall, the mayor, city council members, school principals, and police chiefs from 3 counties filled the seats. Above the stage, a giant screen showed a single sentence David had chosen. "Respect is the first duty of every uniform." When the applause settled, the mayor spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen, we gather not to praise 2 men but to follow their example. A mistake became a lesson, and a lesson became a mission." He gestured toward David and Greg. "Today we launch the Unity and Respect program, joint classes for officers, students, and citizens." A short video rolled, clips of David guiding teens through trust games, Greg leading new recruits in listening sessions, families eating together at the community center. Quiet music played. More than one person wiped away tears. Greg's turn at the mic. Greg walked up, palms sweating. Months ago, he had feared a future full of shame. Now he faced a crowd ready to hope. "I was trained to spot danger," he began. "But training isn't everything if our hearts aren't open. The night I stopped Colonel Walker, I saw a threat that wasn't there. He showed patience. I found my blind spot. Today I teach younger officers what he taught me. Slow down. See people." He paused, voice steady. "We can't change every heart in one day, but we can change the way we start every stop. With respect." A wave of applause rose, police and civilians clapping together. The colonel's challenge, David stepped forward, eyes sweeping the hall. "I have seen war overseas," he said softly. "I've seen brave men and women risk everything for strangers. Yet at home, fear still divides us. Fear that begins with a single glance, a single judgment." He lifted a small folded flag from his pocket, one he carried for soldiers who never came home. "They fought so we could stand here, free to choose understanding over anger. Let's honor them by acting better, every day, every street." Then, he smiled, a calm, contagious smile. "My challenge? Spend 10 minutes this week with someone you usually walk past. Listen, no arguing, just listen. You'll be surprised what respect sounds like." The hall grew still, the kind of stillness right before a promise is made. A medal returned. After the speeches, the state governor stepped onto the stage with a small velvet box. "Colonel Walker," she said, "years ago you earned the Legion of Merit, but you were overseas and never received it in person. Today we fix that." She pinned the bright cross-shaped medal beneath his other ribbons. Cameras flashed, but David's eyes stayed on Greg, sharing the moment. Then the governor turned to Greg. "Officer Miller, the Department of Justice commends you for courageous transparency and reform. You will help build a curriculum for police across our state." Greg's jaw dropped. David patted his shoulder. "A new mission, partner," he whispered. Seeds in young hearts outside, booths lined the courtyard, art for peace, kids painting murals of handshake silhouettes, story circles, veterans and teenagers trading life stories, role-play corner, cadets practicing calm traffic stops while citizens played drivers. David watched 2 boys, one in a mini police cap, one holding a toy soldier's helmet, high-five after finishing a trust exercise. He felt something warm bloom in his chest, soft but strong. Hope. Quiet moment by the river late afternoon, the crowd faded. David and Greg walked to the nearby riverbank for a breath of calm. Ducks drifted on silver water, willow branches swayed. Greg skipped a stone. Think this will last? David took a slow breath. Nothing good grows overnight. But we planted seeds today. If we keep watering them, talks, trainings, patience, they'll rise. Greg nodded. Count me in, every step. David looked at the horizon, where the sun painted the sky gold. Then let's get back to work. Tomorrow we start the next town. They shook hands, no cameras, no clapping, just two men sharing purpose.